Welcome to our fourth weekly Eden Town Hall on Discord. My name's Felix Reese, aka Lion Flash, and I'm co-hosting with Dan, aka Dogman. Um, so with the third official Eden election coming up and anticipated for July 9th, we have more news about what's to come. Today will be another free-flowing show as we let the community to discuss and debate how Eden, different topics that are happening here on Eden. But before then, I'm going to toss it back over to Dan, and he's going to share a little bit more.
Cool. That sounds great. Thank you very much, Felix. And thank you, everybody, for joining and sharing your thoughts here. I really appreciate it. I'll just let everybody know that I just started recording the audio of the meeting and we'll be sharing it, probably just kind of casually sharing it in the Discord channel and stuff like that.
I lost Dogman. I lost audio.
Same here.
All over, I think.
Yeah. One sec. We've got another Zoom going on, so I could
Hello,
hear him,
test.
but it got cut off. There we go.
Test. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, can other people other than Felix hear me?
Yeah, you're all right now.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened or why that happened, but thank you for letting me know, and I'll try to make sure that the technical issues won't happen again. You'll be able to hear me. But yeah, I don't know where I got cut off exactly lately, but I was saying thanks everybody. We're recording and lots of exciting news happening in Eden and EOS. I was listening to Chief Delegate Meeting 11 and then reading the newest documents and chats and so forth that are going on in the Eden Telegram chats. So many things that we can discuss during this call, and we can discuss what people are most interested in. I'll just give a brief overview of some of the topics that I think are exciting that we might want to discuss. So as I mentioned, there's a chief.
We lost you again.
It's strange because I can see my my icon lighting up green, but others can't hear me.
Now we can. I don't know. It looked like we lost you for a split sec because I heard you talking, but then it looked like it stopped over here on Discord.
Yeah, I also lost him for a quick moment.
Okay. Should I continue speaking and hopefully it'll just resolve? Or I don't know, Felix, you want to say it while I try to fix it? Or does anybody have any preference?
Yeah, I think
keep going, but I just don't want to get cut off.
we should probably let's just end our Zoom call because it is giving me pretty bad audio feedback too. I don't know if that's causing the problem.
Okay, sure. Sounds good.
Okay. Sorry about that, you guys. Technical difficulties, but hopefully we're gonna get these smoothed out as time goes on. But yeah, I guess Dan, let me know when you hop back in.
Okay, I'm here now. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'll go for a third try. So I was listening to Chief Delegate's call, and there's lots of things that we can discuss. So for one thing, the Chief Delegates proposed new official bylaw amendments, and there were 4 total bylaw amendments that they proposed. 2 that stuck out to me were one, increasing the treasury disbursements, or actually the bylaw said the treasury disbursements shall be 15% of the Genesis Eden treasury each month, which is currently 3 times more than it currently is at 5% per month, which is a very sizable increase in the amount of funding being proposed for Eden. And then there's also a new mission statement to create enhanced value for the EOS ecosystem and to ensure the organization's continuity. I believe the permissions have also been changed, and that change has been formally executed on chain. Michael also shared a detailed article about the member services, Eden member services, that we can go into. That's very interesting. And it sounds like it's definitely confirmed that the election will be on July 9th. And there was also some applications out to run the election on July 9th I'm curious to learn about. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the next election. It's in 2 or 3 weeks now, so I'm curious to hear everyone's thoughts. Many exciting developments in Eden, and then we were also talking about EOS. There's so many events going on basically every day. We were just actually speaking about this for about 15 minutes before we started, so we can discuss both Eden and EOS news here, of course. And I'm excited to hear what everybody thinks. So maybe I'll pass it back to Felix here. I'll also welcome Chuck too. It's great to have you, and also welcome Patrick. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, I would love to hear if anybody has any thoughts you'd like to share about Eden and EOS and the recent.
I could speak on. I start off with not a major issue, but just kind of a note. I think there was discussion in that meeting about whether to hardwire the 15% figure into the bylaws, and I thought that was an interesting discussion. It's not a major deal, but I think it reflects some kind of it reflects some thinking. So what I think Edgar was driving to, which I agreed with, was to factor out the constant of 15% and to make it essentially a variable. And between him and Chuck, Chuck, I see you just joined this, there was a little bit of discussion. The advantage, I think, of what Edgar was suggesting, I think, comes from him being a programmer and creating systems, and I think that's why it rung positive with me, which is let's pull out the specifics when we can, and allow ourselves to vote just on those specifics without having to make a vote on the bylaws. So why is that important? Why is that why is that a better design value, design principle? What that does for us, if we do things like that, and it's no big deal, it could be changed in the next set, and I don't think anybody has like super strong feelings on it. But I want to put this out there just to kind of help people appreciate the difference. The difference is that if you factor that specific number out, and you essentially reduce the need and the frequency of amending the bylaws. And so what that does is that gives you the ability to raise the bar for amending the bylaws. You can create a separate rule for amending the bylaws. So I don't know exactly what the rule is now. I think it's 3 of 5 or something like that. But let's say at some point after the bylaws became settled and we felt comfortable as a community that they don't need a lot of changes, we could raise the bar to 4 out of 5. And that would give us a sense of security that the organization is less volatile. So it's a small point, but I think it's worth appreciating. So that's my comment. That's one of my comments for the meeting that I just saw yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear if Chuck or anybody has any thoughts about that, and please feel free to jump in if anybody does. It also reminds me of something that James Mart, who's another programmer and great thinker in the EOS ecosystem, talks about a lot, about keeping things really simple. He talks about credible neutrality a lot. So the more simple that you can make the rules and the bylaws, then the less room there is for hidden bias to slip in. And it also just makes it simpler, especially because the Eden bylaws as it is right.
Oh, looks like you dropped out, Dan. But kind of to pick up a little bit though on the conversation, yeah, it would be a little bit interesting. Obviously, like I like this open discussion of whatever topics we want to talk about. We're talking here about the 15% in particular of the Eden Treasury, and that is something that I am a little interested to have a little bit more conversation about. As to, I would prefer to kind of get like I want to hear the the input kind of from Dan himself to see what he thinks, because one of the things I've noticed, it's similar. This was more so here on Fractally, but you had a lot of ideas of how to kind of change the current process or system that we're using. But not to say that these ideas are shallow, but how much deeper thought has been put in versus this is like Dan's life work. So to hear that input, he still is an Eden member, is something that I would like to hear about. The increase to 15%, I'm not sure as to why we could just keep it the same of where it's at, and then we get more funding. Since the ENF has shown interest in continuing to fund Eden, as long as we're pushing forward and making progress, changing something that it seems to be a little bit more, I guess it's not hard coded, but it's something that was kind of part of the initial design, is something that I personally feel a little bit more hesitant about. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear other people's viewpoints on this as well. And yeah, I think Dan is probably still trying to figure out how to get back in. But yeah, if anyone wants to hop in on that, or any thoughts on what I just said.
I think because I was just to follow the conversation. I went along and looked for the proposal for the Eden and EOS bylaw that Chuck shared not too long ago in one of the groups, in the Eden group. Now, in the mission statement, it says that to create an enhanced value for the EOS ecosystem and to ensure the organization's continuity. This last part has been added because before it was only to create value in the EOS ecosystem. So now, in order to ensure the continuity of this organization, maybe that's why the 15% change, I think. But once again, perhaps what you're saying also makes sense, which is the ENF has shown interest in keep the funding for Eden. So maybe the cautiousness is too much. I don't know. I can really tell.
If I could just drop in here, it's Chuck. One of the things we had to do if we were going to introduce the idea even of changing that the monthly budget, we had to bring it onto the bylaws as a variable that even could be changed, because it wasn't in the bylaws, it was only in the code. So like right from the beginning, if it was an idea, if it was a researched a concept of why it should be this number or that number, then that's fine. It was coded the way it was for a reason. But the fact is that it's changeable depending on circumstances, depending on what kind of setup we have in the future. And we needed to bring it into the bylaws. We need to mention it in the bylaws so that it could be addressed as a variable. Again, it wasn't mentioned, so conceivably it could have been addressed by any chief delegates with the active keys. They could have just voted and changed the budget. But what we're putting in there is that the budget number should be in the bylaws, and the changing of it should be a deliberate thing. So it's not impossible to change bylaws, and if a circumstance comes up where we want to change that or we want to adjust that, or as I'm recommending, and I think all of us on the chief delegates right now are recommending, is that in the future, it changes from 15 into delegates' hands and goes to 15 spread out across delegates and circles. And I think if it was thought about in that way, that this is just a step in that direction, then it might make a little bit more sense. Long story short, we just had to get it on the positive variable before we even address it. And as Gracie mentioned in that meeting, as soon as we bring an open-ended, like a range for a variable into the bylaws, a huge discussion that, and probably it would take a lot longer to do anything than was needed.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Yeah, so I guess if you could correct me if I'm wrong, I guess kind of the general base, like, idea behind bringing it as like actually formally written in the bylaws, so that moving forward when we have chief delegates voting on ratifying or amending these bylaws, like it's more explicit through it's actually written instead of going back to like, okay, now we're changing code, which then that falls into, okay, intent of code. Like, yeah, I guess, I don't know, changing code just seems a little bit more extreme versus like like something that's a little bit more, it's more written out to make it more, I guess, yeah, expressive. I don't know if that's like the right way to, I guess, kind of perceive this, or yeah. Am I kind of correct in that line of thinking, Chuck?
I think what he meant was before, since the chief delegates already have the active permissions for changing anything in there, they could at any moment change the budget number. So at least now it's in the bylaws, and it's a little bit more let's say official when changes need to be done and stuff like that. That's what I understood.
Okay. Well, oh,
I'm
there we
very
go, Chuck.
very sorry. Like, just changing applications on my phone is a 2-minute process, and I accidentally changed to Twitter, and then trying to get back to Discord was crazy. So,
Gotcha. No worries.
so yeah, the thinking was that really, when you look at what the power that were given to this set of chief delegates through the changing of the keys, through the changing of the active keys to the control of the chief delegates, it essentially gives control over the entire contract. It gives control of everything over the chief delegates, and critical things. Well, for anything is critical that we're going to be changing at that level. So if we're going to be talking about these things and changing them, they should be like the previous chief delegates brought variables into they changed variables where they could, and we thought that budget drawdown was a variable that needed to be talked about. So we needed to bring it onto that document so that we could adjust the code. So if the next set of chief delegates chooses to ratify this recommendation, then they're going to have to do the work of, or the tech circle rather, is going to find out how to do the work of changing that variable and make it happen. So it's not going to be crazy difficult. It's just a matter of changing it. But then there's also the process of documenting it and keeping it there, so that that anybody in the future would be able to change that variable back or to whatever they want, or like I said, maybe the next term is presented with the chance to put treasury monthly treasury disbursements into buckets for purposes as well as into delegates. So anyway, it was just a matter of getting it onto the document, and because now we have full control over now chief delegates have full control over the contract. It's like some of these things are going to have to be in the bylaws, and they're going to need to be changed at the bylaw level. Some of them can be changed here and there, but for that one in particular, it's pretty important that gets decided by the community as a whole, I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically it's first making sure that it's written before any action can really be taken to the smart contract that needs to be in the bylaws of like, okay, basically chief delegates have this, you're following the bylaws by, you're not changing code unless it's actually in the bylaws itself, is kind of the idea. At like, I guess, basic layman terms, sort of. But, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's essentially it. And I mean, some things in the code probably wouldn't need to go through the whole bylaw process, and I guess it would be up to the community to decide which things did and didn't need to be really, really vetted fully. But I think we're going to see work on GitHub, right? We're going to see back and forth happening at the GitHub level, and if developers and testers want to talk about the implications of certain things, that can certainly be brought up to the the political or the delegate level if there's a requirement for that.
I just want to say that the dynamic, the mental gymnastics that we're all going through as to what can be in the bylaws, who can change the bylaws, when they can change, the whole operating on yourself while in flight concept is not, which is creating consternation, which is causing frustration. It's difficult. It's difficult for the CDs. It's difficult for the members to understand, to comprehend what's going on. That I don't believe that's going to stop if we continue down the road of creating these tightly coupled circles until all of those things that are being talked about are literally in code, and the only thing we're talking about is in code. Until we get to that state, if we can get to that state. That's why I believe that at the very highest level, a DAO that it controls a level 1, something that has actual value, that's a good amount of inflation, benefits or has its best design as its simplest design with the least amount of moving parts at the very top. Now that doesn't say that isn't saying that another DAO or multiple DAOs can't have their own DAOs with circles, and then also this thing that Brock brought up at the end of the meeting, which I hope we talk about in this meeting, that has all of these problems solved. But I think at the very top level, which is the very highest order of distribution of the inflation, I think we benefit greatly from having a very simple, the simplest instance of a DAO and the simplest instance of the mechanisms and the infrastructure, and everything is absolutely simple so that somebody can get elected and then simply distribute funds. And they could be distributing those funds to DAOs, which then have their own centralized or semi-centralized governance. That's a point that I want to make. I'm still pushing. If Eden on Eos is receiving this inflation via ENF, I still am going to push for a simpler version, and I don't think that we should be going down this road of these circles that are going to have incumbents and all of that. That's the point I want to make. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And thank you, Oscar, and thank you, Perry, for sharing that. Of course, I'd be interested to hear responses to Perry's ideas, and also the discussion that Chuck and Felix and everybody are having as well. So feel free to jump in. Sorry, I kind of cut out. I switched my headphones and microphone, so it should be better now. But yeah, I agree with what Perry is saying quite a bit. Like, I think that Eden, it's quite beautiful in like its elegance, and over the past like couple weeks, or past like, I don't know, for the past couple of weeks or couple months, it's been rather difficult to follow along with everything. I mean, I have been, and I'm enjoying learning about everything, but it seems like there is a lot of complexity. And as I was saying before, when I got cut off, I don't know how much I shared, but James Mart has shared some really insightful ideas about credible neutrality. And there's an article that was written by Vitalik Buterin last year or 2 years ago about credible neutrality, and it's a very fundamental and helpful principle that's basically like saying that the best systems are the simplest systems. It goes along with the sayings and the adages like perfection is not when there's nothing left to add but nothing left to take away. And when we add additional circles and so forth, I can see the functional benefits from it, and I'm not as I feel like Perry is quite concerned about it, and I can see room for concern, but I can also see how that could be super helpful, especially in the near term as well, to fund improvements that are needed. But I can imagine for somebody who's just joining the ecosystem, like this would be probably very confusing and quite a turnoff for many people. So we need to simplify it, and I do think that we can simplify it. Like I feel like we're going through kind of a metamorphosis right now, maybe, or like we're going over a hump where it's like more confusing now because the chief delegates are near the end of their second term, and there's been so much uncertainty. But I can imagine that in the third term, we can make it work where like we have the circles basically simplified and functional, so we're not discussing it so much, but they're actually working and they're funding people to do helpful work. And then we can also work to continually simplify it and also encode things as a smart contract and have things working like the Eden fractal and the fractally process, and maybe incorporating elements of Haifa like Brock Pierce was talking about, to simplify and make it very easy for people to join and participate and get rewarded right away. Because we do want to make sure that we want to grow Eden, and to grow Eden, we have to make it like really interesting for people to join and not too complex. So those are some thoughts there. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, Perry. I think there's a lot of great insights there, and yeah, I'd be interested to hear what others think about this as well. Or we could also. Oh, okay, cool. Sounds good, Doug.
Well, I was just going to say, I am a firm believer in simplicity. If there's a simpler way of accomplishing something than a more complex way, it's typically less resource intensive, less cumbersome to think about. And adding complexity, especially, I don't know, being new to like EOS, I feel like, there's this old adage, if your only tool's a hammer, you hit everything like a nail. And when you're in a blockchain ecosystem, it's just sort of like this desire to tokenize everything or govern everything by smart contracts. And I'm a firm believer, and there's some things that the human capacity and intelligence interaction can't be, organized into a simple programmatical way. And so what Perry's saying to me makes a lot of sense. I've heard Dan speak similarly in the Fractally groups. I guess really where I'm at with it all is not having clear enough context over what the concern are with these circles and whatnot. And I'll just bring up one little snippet and that I found interesting. I'm a WordPress background developer, and I've been on the EOS translation team now. I don't know how long it's been. We've been probably going for a couple months, I'm guessing. I don't know. But one of the things that was interest to me was the feedback I was getting from the Chinese Eden group over the quality of language translation, and pointing to certain kinds of examples where they're proofing it and they're saying this is not good, it doesn't make sense, and whatever. And I didn't really understand exactly what role, let's say, Jesse of the EOSBs was playing, or what role the NF was playing in this, or what's actually going on with the actual language translation issues. But I've been intimately concerned about this topic because I'm trying to solve this linguistic challenge with, governance of communities. And I'm digging up all sorts of interesting information. And for me, it's sort of like I'm wondering, is it possible that what's going on in our ecosystem isn't the best solution necessarily? There's a better way, and whatever I'm doing or whatever I'm working on is a way that I support because they're people that I care about and I want to see succeed. But in my mind, I'm thinking like this needs to be looked at in a whole different direction, and no one's willing to take that look. And I guess part of it, I've heard some feedback given from other members also, sort of implying, like I don't know how to say this, sort of relationships developing within the ecosystem that maybe are co-supportive of each other, but not necessarily supportive of the community. And I don't want to believe or think there's any bad actors in this community, but I definitely feel as though we need to have a better mechanism for dialogue. We need to have a better mechanism for problem solving. All this stuff that goes on these Telegram groups, a lot of it is just, to me, it's just endless banter over minutiae of details that I guess need to be resolved, but is not what I want to be thinking and focusing on. And so I found myself leaving a lot of the Telegram groups. So I just didn't want to participate in that topic of discussion. And so I really appreciate this town hall. I really appreciate um, uh, Dan and Felix taking an initiative to spearhead this. And Grahapa, Perry, yeah, man, I love your perspective on things. I love your input. I feel that I'd like to see more people be willing to participate, give their input, and contribute. And right now, I don't even really know what all the answers are. But I'm sort of sitting. I'm almost like scared of joining the Eden elections because I'm afraid of getting elected to a chief delegate position or something. I'm like at a point where I've been so confused with EOS and sort of how do I add value to this? What can I do? But I'm at the same time I'm mesmerized. I don't want to miss a beat. So I really appreciate being here, and I just really feel as though the dialogue that is that's happening in this group is something that should be grown, and it's something that's valued. And I have a ton of videos of one-on-one interviews or team interviews of dialogue that I think needs to get out. And I'm very interested in talking about not only calendaring systems, but a more intelligent methodology to our marketing, to where all businesses can be brought up to speed with just like basic fundamentals with web practices or internationalization or just what's available. And so I guess that's sort of where my Pomelo pitch is probably going to end up heading if I end up getting one together. So I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to speak to I guess this going back to the original topic of like the need for simplicity and how much, because I feel as though like, do you trust a smart contract and more than you trust people's judgment? And do you trust the Eden process of having elected people that are in good judgment or representative? And sometimes I feel as though there's people have these kind of traumatic wounds of the past or something, and have a lot of things that keeps them moving forward in a healthier way because they're concerned about things that are they're very fearful of. And I don't know what's reasonable. All I know is that I am happy to have not lost my master key, I guess, to my EOS account and only got it drained once from a scam. So it's sort of like I feel weird because at one level I feel so knowledgeable about this ecosystem, but it's at such a basic fundamental level. Like I still have to this day not been able to buy any EOS, and I'm frustrated as hell by it. So it's like that's where I'm coming from. It's a pretty odd perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you, Doug. Yeah, no, we really appreciate having community members like you and everyone that's here. And it is exciting. I think I agree. For the simplicity side of things, I don't want things to get too complex to where if I'm struggling to understand it, and I feel like I'm a person that's more, I'm definitely dived, like everyone here is dived in deeper than the average Joe, who we all hope to mainstream, like for mainstream adoption will integrate these systems into their basically everyday lives. And So, the thing that always comes to mind with these Eden services and these proposals is like Eden fractals, like fractals and delegates and chief delegates allocating their funds to these fractals and then let this system be a true reputation system and let it work its way out. Like, I feel like this is exactly what Eves preaches is like, we need to be fine with taking chances. And if we fell, but we learn from it. And right now, my only, thing I would say against like kind of centralizing these services is if now we're appointing people to bring people out potentially outside of Eden and contracting work and then it's hard to know and measure the performance, I guess, until after the product's built. But then it just kind of starts to seem and feel that same type of even though that that's probably not the case. I believe we have a lot of good people in this community pushing for a better initiative, but EOS has been burned with the whole being led on by Block One with promises of things to come. And when I see these Eden fractals, and one thing too is this is one of the things I want to bring up as we approach the election is like everyone who's participating in this Eden fractal, everyone that's here, we all have our own voice that we can start to carry into these elections of what we want to vote for. For me, I do want to see delegates and chief delegates starting to put their funding towards. If you don't want to use the fractal method, don't use the fractal method. But let's start to actually distribute these funds and declare the purpose of what the funds are meant to do and see how efficient they are. So we can really start to measure how efficient these delegates and chief delegates are at deploying funds. Because at the simplest way, that's how I viewed Eden. Is we're electing representatives to be fund managers, and who's the best with allocating those funds. If we start to make things too complex before we even really got started, I do see, and I feel like I'm not the only one that's feeling this sense of hesitancy to jump into like really breaking this down and trying to structure it so just more complex. And I think with any more like complexity things could break a little bit easier. And that's why it kind of goes back to like the 5% going to 15%. Like I need to do, there's a lot going on in this space. So keeping up with everything is hard. So I do need to do more research on it and read the proposal and really truly understand, and think of like what implications could come of it. But I definitely advocate more for simplicity and going into this next EAT election. That's one of the things that I want to push for, and I hope other community members do too. Is like we need to have members who are willing to participate in this online community, to show up to events, to participate in the community. If you want to be elected to manage funds, because we need to know who you are. This is a reputation system that we're building here, and I agree. I think the more simpler the better, and this is just kind of carrying on to Doug's point, but much respect to the chief delegates, because I think this round of chief delegates, what you guys have done, with Chuck being here, as well as like one thing that I really appreciate. What you guys have done is you're really leading by example with the way you guys are conducting these meetings. You're having intent behind every meeting. You're keeping it to an hour. You're keeping things organized. That is the type of stuff that I want to basically deploy with these Eden fractals, or with the Eden fractal, is that type of structure and like professionalism. To start to manage and openly, transparently manage and deploy these funds. But I don't know if necessarily I agree with, and like I said, I also need to do more discussion, but also hearing feedback too. It's also not, I feel like it's not only just kind of my gut reaction, but I also am feeling that other people in this community feel the same, that we do need to be cautious before we do a complete overhaul of kind of, I don't know, maybe centralizing Eden a little bit too much. Like, I do tend to agree with a lot with what Perry says, with like having it loosely coupled and not getting too tied down to, you know, a centralized authority that can kind of start to use money to dictate and elevate themselves in a place of power. And though we have, I think, a lot of good intentions behind everyone, you know, here in this community, and there's, you know, we've been through a lot all together. It's just best to you know, ride on the side of caution, especially when we have such great things going on with, you know, the Eden Fractal and the new technologies that we're deploying here on Eden. You know, I get the sense of urgency, but we are moving, but we don't need to move way too fast either. As long as we're moving, but we're moving intelligently, cautiously as well, though. That's just kind of my opinion. But yeah, I'd like to, you know, anyone who wants to piggyback off that.
Thanks,
feel free to
Felix.
jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Felix. I would love to piggyback off that if nobody else has anything that they want to jump in with first. So I agree very much that it's good to be cautious, and we have a responsibility to help Eden grow in like a sustainable way. We don't want to try to grow too fast and then fizzle out because we try to move too fast. I look at the Genesis Fractally group, which doesn't have any funding, and they're doing tremendous work. Probably in a lot of ways more than Eden, because there's like 40 people or so who are showing up almost every week and doing contributions.
Oh, looks like you dropped out again, Dan.
You dropped out at just the wrong spot. I was very interested. What are they doing?
Untrusted third-party services.
Looks like we're gonna be left in suspense.
This is too much. I wanted to hear what he had to say too.
Huh?
Oh, we
Can
got
you hear
you.
me?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so sorry. I have no idea what's happening. I have to go troubleshoot. I thought it was my headphones. Maybe it's my Wi-Fi. I don't know. I'm sorry. Should I continue where I left off, or did you guys start talking about something else already?
Nope, we were waiting. You were building up the suspense for us.
Okay, sounds good. Well, that was all planned, just to build up the suspense more. Yeah, so I was saying how, like, you don't really need funding to get a community to coordinate. Like, for example, the Fractally Genesis community, just the belief in the community, and then also the prospect of the respect that might come on chain and then be worth something in the future is coordinating like tremendously helpful work. And so people there aren't really thinking so much about like where to do with funding. It's just like the process is working. And
Uh-oh, there we go. You dropped out again, Dan. But yeah, I guess a quick thought that I'd want to throw in there too is, yeah, we need, you know, I think we're building a community, so community interaction is super key. And, you know, one of the things I'm realizing though too is, a lot of that conversation happens in Telegram, and, you know, for the longest, I'm very bad at getting on Telegram. I don't like the notifications because I get overwhelmed with those notifications. But then when I hop on, sometimes there'll be like 100, 200 messages, and it's like, oh, geez, like that's a ton of reading, and that's only one group. Now I got to go to another group too that's got another 100 messages. And so, you know, that's why I advocate for Discord. But, you know, at the end of the day, the best type of content, the best way we intake information is through stuff like this, through live interactions, through audio or video and content. And, you know, I just think that's the way that like, that's how you probably really should grow a community too, is to encourage that type of interaction instead of always behind a keyboard, because it's very easy to type things versus coming out and saying them, because, you know, there's just weight behind when you speak something into, you know, basically existence. Like when you speak, your words are out there, and yes, you can type something, but it's very easily lost sometimes, because it's not as live. And yeah, so, you know, it kind of goes back to just the whole idea of, I I'm just super bullish on fractals. Like I just the way I'm thinking about things, and I really do think, you know, I brought this up in my meeting yesterday, that Eden fractally breakout room was, there's a genius behind the Fibonacci sequence. Like it mimics nature, and it's like what I feel like I'm seeing. You know, we're seeing fractals, like Alien Worlds is another fractal that just popped off, and now everyone in this fractally Genesis group is starting to see fractals like popping off everywhere, and why is that? And it's like, I think it goes back to the mathematics, like it's the resemblance of nature. Like nature is taking its course through the built-in mathematics that's behind the design of the system. So yeah, it's just super fascinating. And
I'll comment on that. I've been developing UIs for almost 3 decades, and one thing I learned some time ago was to use the Fibonacci numbers in my UIs. If you examine the page source for some of the things that I build, when I do them, when I choose them, when I choose just simple, and this is off topic, but it really talks about what Dan has done and what he's keyed into, which is those numbers, to make my user interfaces more harmonious with each other and easier development from my point of view. I choose Fibonacci numbers. I choose 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, I think it's 89, 144, 233, and I don't go much farther beyond that. But for example, how many pixels do I divide, or do I create a border for, or a padding on an element relative to its neighbor, like a text box next to its neighbor, or what is the space between this section and that section? I don't really pay much attention to whether, you know, it's the next number in the Fibonacci sequence, but I just choose among those numbers. And the odd thing is that if I just do that, if I just follow that simple principle, it just seems to look nicer. And I don't know exactly why. I have suspicions, but it just seems to work. So there is something special about those numbers, and I just wanted to share that and reinforce your point and what the direction Dan is bringing us.
yeah, thank you, Perry. And that looks like, I don't know, Doug, if you were gonna say something.
Yeah, well, it was around the time, it was probably 9 weeks ago, 8 or 9 weeks ago, I'm guessing, when I had gone in and out of Fractally meetings because I didn't really know what to think about it, and the whole process and everything initially was sort of confusing to me. And then I started going regularly. I decided I was going to commit to it, and I joined the team. And it was a big change for me because I think that if Fractally hadn't come about, and what I mean by come about is not like, because I remember the February 22nd thing date, and I also remember a lot of people being disappointed because it was not what they thought it was going to be. That was my perspective, but it was only after like a couple months of it being around that I really got to get a gist of what it was going on there and whether or not I wanted to participate. And I decided I wanted to, and I was going to commit to, if anything, to that. And the large reason I did is because I was actually getting to meet people. You know, I was actually meeting people face to face, talking to them, you know, getting to know them, and then through the team. That was a huge thing. Without that, I would not be around the EOS ecosystem probably today. Like, I probably would be gone because I would have got fed up with all the Telegram bots and just nonsense talk and just like nothing productive for me to do. And so since then, you know, all I've essentially done is leverage my position within the Fractally team to come back to the EOS ecosystem with another feather in my cap. you know, and it's sort of like funny to me because I feel so excited to be able to just like waltz into this ecosystem, and within 6 months time, like, you know, just last weekend was my breakout group was Dan Larimer, you know, and I ended up getting ranked or leveled fifth behind him as sixth. So I was in the week before that I got a 6. The week before that I got a 1. So it's sort of like my whole experience is sort of like haphazard. Like I've never gotten a 6 before.
The software is coming from it. You know, Dan dropped some alpha about the UI. That's super exciting. And once that gets deployed, it's open software. And so Eden will be able to take that. Our Eden Fractal, we have some developers. I definitely see like they'll be able to dive into that open software, and then we can start to add little things that we would like to add. But you know, it goes to your talking point that like what has kept you around, Doug, is what you said is the interactions, the community, and that's what's special here about Eden, is that it is centered around supposed to being like it's a DAO application. It's for communities, and that's going to be huge. Like I'm super excited to be like, if we capture more funding for the Eden Fractal, that's going to naturally draw people in. You're going to be able to come and participate and get NFTs, Eden Respect and EOS, and then that's going to get people locked in, and now then they're going to start to meet other people, and then that's where I see other fractals starting to, like, you know, branch off, and then, but that's right there. Retention is key in so many areas when it comes to business, to be honest. Like, you know, when we're talking content creation, like for you to do well, you need to have good retention rates. Like that's how these social media platforms make money, and with cryptocurrencies there's so much noise. That's going to be key as well. It's like we need retention. You need a reason for people to come back in, and there's no better way to earn cryptocurrency than by earning it rather than having to go and buy it. And so, you know, here is here on Eden, the Eden Fractal is the first one, even beyond what we're doing over on the Fractally Genesis, of you can actually start to earn like real true value to pay for your contributions. And so yeah, I just think right now it's key to get more funding going, because my gut feeling is when more funding is in there, more people are going to start showing up, and that's how we really grow. That's how we win as a Eden, to be able to go to the ENF and be like, look, our membership rate's growing, our interactions, the retention, all of that's going well. We're succeeding. We're bringing and driving value to EOS. There should be no reason to continue to be able to get funding. And, you know, that's kind of where I see, like, you know, that goes back to the whole, and I'm not trying to hate, like I said, on the 15% thing. It's just the one thing that stands out to me is I would like to see Eden and the Fractalies team's viewpoint on if the 5% is like, if 15% is fine versus the 5%, and yeah, kind of go based off their feedback and innovate. You know, that's what's nice about the Eden Fractal too, is like we're not bound to what Dan says. We can take what he says and you know, apply our own little spin to it. But I think what we do here on the Eden Fractal really well is we really do respect and take into consideration the amount of time and thought that has been put behind, you know, these whole processes. This is a technology that is right there with the career, the lifelong career work of Dan Larimer and the Fractally team. Because it's not just Dan. He's got some loyal people on his team that's been with him since Block 1 and prior before that too. So, they're not just sticking around for no reason either. I'm not sure if you had Chuck, if you want to jump in. I can see your little thing spinning, which is cool. I don't know how you do that. You have to let us know. That's a cool little feature.
I wanted
Well,
to too.
There's one time back in, I guess last November, I decided, hey, I've got $100. Let's drop it on Discord. So I got the subscriber a year's whatever upgrade for Discord, and then you can put little gifs in your logos. Then that's why. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. But on the one hand, you're saying the Eden Fractal, if we could just get more funding, and then you say, but I don't know about this 15% thing, and the impetus behind the 15% thing was we just need more funding. We just need more funding distributed amongst the delegates by the delegates. So when we see something like an member engagement circle or a Eden Fractal circle that is sitting there with a bunch of people populating it, and they're asking for funding, and then suddenly everybody has 15%, like 3 times the funding level. It's like we're, without mentioning circles, you'll notice that we didn't mention circles anywhere in the bylaw document. We did, that's all just preamble and context. But what we did was set up the conditions so that the next set could decide whether they wanted to institute circles in a more formal way. But what we want to see for this next set is a lot more funding out there so that people can more readily decide to distribute it. You were talking about seeing people distribute their funding more efficiently, equitably, transparently, all these things. And it starts with being able to distribute more funding. If you look at a level 1 delegate right now who's pulling in what, $120, yeah, I'm going to go in dollars right now, but $120 a month, what does that do? What is that delegate able to do, able to share? Like, does he feel like he needs to share 90% of that, 80%, 50%, 0%? Depending on what that delegate is choosing to do with his or her time, and that's one reason why I'm not showing up to the Fractally meetings on Saturdays right now, is because as a chief delegate, I see my time, the time that I'm going to be spending on this sector, I've got to dedicate it to Eden, and the money that's going to be allocated to delegates and chief delegates. If we get more of it just flowing out of Treasury, it means that there's more of it out there that we can individually choose, and this is loosely coupled, we can individually choose to direct it into whatever buckets we want. So if you want to give it to the NFT project, or you want to give it to the Eden Fractal project, you're welcome to do that, right? But just raising the levels would encourage people to do that. And then there might actually be a competition amongst elected people to see how much they can give away of their stuff. Because right now, it's almost like we're fighting to, we're giving funding out through the Palmetto mechanism. And I've got personal questions about, I'm not going to get into it, but I've got, is Eden double dipping? Is Eden taking advantage of the entire network when we allocate Treasury through Palmetto and distribute it among members so that they can spread it out? There's stuff like that. But all I'm saying is you're saying on the one hand, Felix, that we need more funding for things like Eden Fractal, and then a question of whether bumping up the Treasury drawdown is too aggressive. And I reading Dan's rationale on the 5%. It was more like, if we never get funding again, 5% is a good rate. That was my perception of his of the 5%. And we're going to get funding again from the network, and it's a matter of Eden proving it, proving that we're doing something productive, so that we can deserve that funding again from the network. So I just see this as a test that, you know, we've already accomplished a whole lot of stuff individually by individuals in Eden, and now we need to do it on a more corporate level. Corporate meaning a body, meaning an organism, as other people have said. That we need to be thinking more of us as a collection of individuals forming a functional living body. And I think the way we could do that is by offering little offering opportunities for people to send their money where they want to do it. And it's Palmetto is an option, sure, but within Eden, if we had projects identified by Eden as projects that were Eden wanted to throw its name behind, that's what I'm saying is I'd say a .Eden account is something that's expressly operating along Eden's principles. So anyway, there's too much philosophy going on. You know, sometimes we're talking back and forth about these things, but it's like, we're just going to try this number, or sorry, we're going to recommend that we try this number. If the newly elected people don't wish to triple their budget, they can choose not to do that. But we're going to leave it at that, because we have to just create baby steps and conditions for things to happen. And we thought that just doing this would create the conditions for more more organized buckets of resources. I'm done.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, no. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dan. I've been talking a bit.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. I hope I don't get cut off now. I restarted my phone. Lots of different things I've been trying to do to get this to work. I've been enjoying listening, and I also just want to touch upon a couple things. So, one, what Oscar said previously about introducing the Eden member service. I'm not sure if we've specifically talked about the Eden member services. I'm not sure if everybody's read the Eden member services article that just came out yesterday. So perhaps it might be helpful to kind of go through it or give an overview. Just to give a very quick overview, there's, I believe, 3 circles that are being proposed in the Eden member services. One for election services to actually ensure that the elections happen on time and efficiently and successfully and so forth. And then one for technology, for building the smart contracts and so forth for the bylaws to make it work. And then thirdly, for a circle of communications and public relations, which will do things like handle the publication of chief delegate meetings and perhaps notes about those and lots of other things. And then there's also a suggested circle of community investment. So just to provide just a high-level overview, I would recommend everybody check that article to learn more. It looks like, I think Michael wrote it, and he wrote it quite well and quite detailed. So if anybody hasn't read it, I would recommend checking out. And yeah, I think that the Eden member services, like Chuck is saying, they can help raise funding for lots of helpful tools and hopeful developments with Eden. I mean, we want to be careful about it, and it's great to have the dialogue and the dialectic to figure out the best way to do it, and not rush into anything too fast. But I think there's a lot of interesting potentials and interesting discussions here. And I also just wanted to bring it back too to what I guess Doug was saying and Felix was saying. There's so much interesting conversation about the fractals, and I'm so excited about the fractals. It's what, as I think I was saying when I got cut off before, the thing that attracted me to Eden, and the thing that Chuck has been such a strong proponent of for a while is, and I think Felix and many other people here, and also Doug was saying, is just the act of just getting on video calls and just speaking together with people and meeting people. That's where the magic really is. We're not really meant to be as people looking at Telegram and stuff for a long time, and we're just not as efficient. So when we're able to combine like the Eden member services with the Eden Fractal and whatever other circles that we need to make Eden work well, like ensuring the elections and technical development and so forth required. Like, I think that's what will really help Eden be as successful as possible. And then to hone in on that focus of enabling that way that people can experience and join in and get to meet people, just like Doug did. Like, Doug was interested in EOS, but said he might have left if it weren't for Fractally. And we can do that with the Eden Fractal. We can do that with so many more. And like, when you think about it, we have like the Eden Fractal is once a week, 2 hours. The chief delegates meet and everybody listens, or a lot of people listen. They meet for like an hour a week. We have the Genesis Fractally meeting, which is separate from Eden, but a lot of participants are there for a couple hours a week. We have these town halls for an hour or two a week, and these are great. They're audio calls, not quite video calls. So I think eventually we can explore using video calls, but like all that together, it's still only like 4 hours a week or 5 hours a week or something like that. And when we're able to use these processes, the Eden process, the Eden Fractal process, and so forth, to encourage people to meet more and provide like a really welcoming place for people to learn about Eden and EOS and fractal cooperation and so forth, and also earn while they're doing it and get to know people and build together. I think that's really what's going to help Eden succeed the most as possible. And I think that if this Eden member services proposal can facilitate that, then I think that will be really helpful. And I think the Eden member services proposal can facilitate it. So there's a lot to discuss here, but I just wanted to put that out there, a lot of thoughts. I'm very excited about it overall, and yeah, I'm interested what people think about that, those perspectives as well. And sorry if I cut you off there, Felix. You can go if you'd like, and hope it didn't cut out at all.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know if Doug, you wanted to hop in really quick. I was gonna address Chuck's points, but yeah, I'll let you hop in real quick.
Just real quick, newsflash. I've been looking at the roadmap ahead in the curve. The new future user interface is voice. Talk to your computer. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I follow that.
Well, I'm just saying that in a very short order of time, we're going to be doing a lot less typing on our computers, and we're just going to be talking to our computer. The new future user interface, the new UI is going to be voice, like voice dictate, voice command, like AI. And that's my prediction. And that's my warning. And that's my sort of thinking about what you're saying about the importance of this interaction being live, or, you know, with human or whatever. There's technology that exists now that can clone a human voice. So I could theoretically get a voice dictate program to speak just like me and narrate whatever I want it to say from a branding perspective. And there's just a lot of things coming on the road ahead that I'm looking at that I find interesting. I just like pointing it out now and then.
Okay. Yeah, that's oh, can you guys hear me? Yep. Yeah, that's actually really interesting. No, I tend to agree with that idea too. You know, I have some friends that like they'll send like through social media, instead of like typing, they just send, you know, little voice calls, and yeah, it is easier to consume that as long as it's not drawn out. But that goes back to kind of retention also. But yeah, no, that's really interesting. But yeah, to kind of address Chuck's points about you know, I guess kind of, you know, I am advocating for more funding, but also hesitant on increasing to the 15%. So I guess kind of what I would say is, so I guess kind of my initial hesitancy of increasing to the 15% is, okay, so, you know, the chief delegates, you guys are proposing that we're going to increase the 15%. So then the next chief delegates that come in a way, they're kind of like, it's kind of incentivized to be like, well, hey, we get more funding if we take 15%. Like, why would we not approve that bylaw? And that to me is kind of like a red flag, because I'm like, okay, well, now we're starting to play with like, okay, well, we can drain the treasury by just proposing stuff, and then all you need to do is like the benefactors of the increase of the budget is the next set of chief delegates that would be the ones to approve and I think ratify is the correct way to say it. And so then there, it's like that is like ethically, like I guess I don't know. I think maybe that's the correct way to say is like there's a moral hazard to basically approve that, because it's like you low key, if you care about wanting to have more funding, like why would you not want to approve it? But at the same time, I think we do need to protect the treasury. Part of me where I get a little bit where I guess I'd have a little pushback as far as like, I am advocating for more funding, but I'm not necessarily saying like, well, let's increase the treasury amount. I think what we're doing here with Eden, I think we've already started to do enough to be able to be like, hey, we can get more, we can get the increase in the treasury. So now the funding, the 5% distribution is more, but not necessarily because it went from 5 to 15%, but it's just because now the treasury has more funds in it. And I feel like we can make an argument as Eden that we have started to make progress, and to kind of deny us of that, I would fight for that like a little bit. Like, we've been moving, we're making progress, a lot more progress than we did, the first term. So to say, oh, you haven't done enough, then that's a little pushback that I would have against the ENF. But and I'm not trying to cause anything, because I think the ENF has been supportive and is showing and possibly willing. I think we just need to be willing to ask. And I'm also at a point where I don't think we need to be super hesitant to be like, hey, we got to make sure we do everything 100% before we come and ask. And it's like, well, it doesn't hurt to ask. And then I want to hear a response, and I want to know why that response, like, give me a reason behind the response. And if it's a fair response, then we decide, okay, well, maybe we increase to 15%. But like I said, I think this starts to open up a slippery slope. If we start proposing, we can change the amount of treasury funds that gets distributed, dependent on, if that's proposed in a bylaw. And then, like I said, just the kind of moral hazard that's built into it, because any increase, that next set of chief delegates, in a sense, are kind of incentivized, because now there's more money on the table. Why would you not take it?
Now, look at it from the network's perspective, Felix. And the network has this money in grants savings account, and they've given us, like, right now we're sitting on literally like 200,000 EOS, or 196 or whatever it is, and we say we don't have enough EOS to do what we want to do with, so please give us some more, so that at our 5% drawdown we have more monthly. And then the network looks at us and says, well, you're sitting on 200,000 EOS. What the hell are you doing with it? And we're like, we're holding on to it in case Eden never gets any more funding again. So, like, I'm saying that the rationale that Dan had for the 5% drawdown was based upon the fact that we might never see any more funding again. And what we're saying, and what the network has been saying, is we will see more funding again. So what we have to do now is use the funding that we have. We have technology that needs to be maintained and updated, or evolved. Like, if we wanted to do more with the software, that's money that should just come out of Eden's treasury, and every delegate takes a hit on their budget, and it gets paid for. And then the ENF, authorizes the network to top us up. It's what we have right now is, Dan's analogy of, splitting a cookie in half. I'm going to split the cookie in half, but then I'm going to take the half. But what we're actually saying is, like, we've got a cookie to split, but we're not even going to split the cookie until we have 2 more cookies beside us. Right? We're not actually going to use what we have until we know that we have 2 more cookies lined up. And that's the kind of thing that's happening with our treasury right now. We're just not using, as I said in the last Chief Delegates call, if you look at the perspective of the network of last year, when this money was given to us, we were in a very acute emergency situation. And we still are, though it's a hell of a lot better right now than it was this time last year. But if you look at it from the network's perspective, they're going to print money, distribute it to organizations and individuals to try to jumpstart the whole ecosystem. And then we're given a whole bunch of money and we put it into a savings account and don't do anything with it. That's how the rest of the network sees us right now. And then for us to say, please at least promise us that you're going to give us more money before we actually use our savings account, it just doesn't look good for the network. We're just being far too conservative with it, because as Brock has said also, we have to come at this from a position of abundance. We have abundant resources on EOS, and that's the story that we're trying to tell the world, is that EOS is open for business and we're ready to go. And I think Eden has to say, we're open for business, we're ready to go, we're in control of our own destiny, and we can manage ourselves now. There's nobody holding our hand anymore. And our electoral system has to stand on its own merits, and we have to elect capable people to be able to run this show, because Dan and Fractally are no longer holding our hands, and we have to be able to do it ourselves.
Yeah. So, but yeah, and so I think this is really where we're starting to. It's interesting. I do believe that this is going to be a hot topic going into this next election, because I feel that this is the ENF asking the Eden to tap into our contingency by increasing the 15%. And to me, like I said, where I think the issue falls is it starts to set a precedent and a potential moral hazard of like now we're saying that chief delegates can change the amount of treasury drawdown that they can propose through bylaws, and yeah, it's just, I think that the network can look at Eden and they can, if we stick to the 5%, then they know how much is going to be deployed. That's a set amount. It's not like, okay, yeah, we have money in our savings, but that's a contingency amount. For worst case scenario, we get no more funding. And the thing is, it's like, okay, but now we're being asked to, hey, spend the money that you have in case you don't get any more funding, because then we promise we're going to give you more funding. So that to me is it's a red flag. It's not something that I kind of feel, and also, I definitely feel other members feel the same way too. So it's starting to see.
But if you're calling it a contingency fund, if you're calling it a contingency fund, that's based on an assumption. Just the act of naming it contingency fund is based on the assumption that we might not get anything ever again. And I don't think, for the health of Eden, we should be operating from that perspective. It's a, I guess, a philosophical difference, but it means you either act boldly, and we've been expressly invited to act boldly with our resources. You either act boldly or you act very conservatively. And if we act conservatively, we encourage another method of capture of Eden. And I know you encourage people to sign up Eden members with the intention of forming parties and taking it over. Otherwise, there's all sorts of moral hazards in either direction. That's all I'm saying.
Chuck, what are the moral hazards of not taking action? Because I'm not really sure what you're getting at there. As far as as far as parties taking it over to collude, if you keep the disbursement rate at 5%, are you saying? Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Sorry. Again, my phone is slow.
Okay. No.
I'm saying that there are other ways of thinking about Eden. You either Eden is just a way to distribute money, and it's based on an election system. So you're going to work, if you're looking to capture that budget from Eden, and you think about ways that we can do that. You think about ways of signing up the maximum number of people and influencing the elections with the maximum number of voter turnout, and voting for specific candidates or voting for specific groups of candidates, and then funneling that money into an organization or into a pool of some sort. I mean, that's one option. That is one way that we can do this. Or we can think about people standing more on. I see that as the result of the let's fund a project motive versus the let's fund let's elect leaders motive. So there are plenty of ways now in our ecosystem to fund projects. And if we're just a WPS, and if the election system is just a worker proposal system, then it's not really the country or the party, the town or the village that Dan envisioned in More Equal Animals. If all we're doing is electing people to distribute funding, then it's not really what More Equal Animals was writing about. We're trying to create more of it's a different way of doing things. It's a different way of doing government. It's a different way of doing money. It's a different way of doing communities. And this technology, all it is getting together in small groups and electing a delegate, and then they move on to the next stage of the election, and they voice the concerns of their voters. And it's not rocket science, but it is something. It's a new way of doing things using smart contracts, and I think we need to keep doing that. And we need to think about ways that we can share that technology and make it into something that we can repeat around the world. But again, it's a difference in outlook. I think that Eden, it can be a lot more than just distribution of funding.
Why don't you give us an example of a smart contract instantiated in a circle? So maybe we can get some color to that, because I'm not clear exactly what you have in mind, Chuck.
I'm guessing maybe Chuck is dealing with his phone issues, but I think that I could probably answer that. I think that, say, if you had Eden Fractal or something similar, where you have a smart contract set up on an account with multi-sig, and then you have some disbursement of EOS going to there, then that would qualify for what Chuck is saying as a smart contract embedded in a circle. I see Chuck is unmuted too, though, so I don't know if Chuck wants to answer it any differently.
Well, just think about a circle that's comprised of a bunch of responsible people, and they're all on an MSIG, a large MSIG, and they're responsible for the resources that they hold in that contract. And yeah, just like the Eden Fractal circle, maybe they're responsible for a few thousand EOS and a few thousand really cool NFTs, and all they need to do is distribute those to weekly meetings. That's a simple contract, and I mean it's complex, but it's a simple goal. It's a simple outcome, but that's just a plug-in to the greater Eden community. It's not something that needs to interact. Like, you would be using the results of the Eden contract itself. Like, you'd be looking at the membership roles and everything, and you'd be using permissions and keys that are already there. But you're just taking that information and doing something else with it, and it doesn't need to be related to the Eden system, the Genesis system contract. It's just another way of using that information. Think about any other, think about the giving the opportunity for people to use this as a DApp for any other purpose that they might have, where all you do is you use the election system, and it helps a school council run their business, or it helps a small government run their business, or it helps elect the seniors club or something like that. It's a simple thing. It's just a simple plug-in. And if a circle had that vision where it could develop a smart contract that was aligned with Eden's goals and objects, and then deploy it, and Eden would be part of the Eden ecosystem. We're talking about DeFi. We're talking about locking up, total value locked increasing, right? If we can do anything to help the yield plus ideal, it's like get people into this Eden ecosystem, give them opportunities to play around with things, earn money doing things, earn NFTs doing things, lock up those NFTs, lock up that EOS, and just stay in the system. There's all sorts of ways you can think about to write simple, small, smart contracts that could do something. Like think about one where Eden could be publishing NFTs, right? We've been talking about this, but it's just it doesn't need to be an autonomous smart contract. Like they're all autonomous, I guess. They're all running, but it doesn't need to be this big thing standing off by itself. It's just another tool for the Eden community to use. There's all sorts of things you can think about. Even just using the permissions, like the membership tree that we have. Every election, we could be developing MSIGs to do all sorts of really cool things based upon how the election falls out. Like the first round of delegates, every table, every round, every room, ends up with an MSIG that's how they cooperate democratically with the whole term down, for the next 3 months, for example. There's any number of things you can think about to think about how a smart contract could help organize people.
Okay.
And insurance,
But
it's more and more complex.
it sounds like what you've described is an extension of control from the Eden group, from Eden, and a reasonable amount of complexity that begins to mimic a traditional organization. That I would argue, I would repeat, is going to be difficult to maintain in an environment where you're trying to represent many people's interests. And that, for example, in the next set of CDs may not agree with that. That's one point. The other point is, well, let me ask it this way. Did you or Michael or any of the CDs campaign on these circles, which seem to be the dominant feature of your term?
Campaign when?
When you were elected?
Let me think. I can't speak for anybody else but myself, because I wasn't following their election campaigns as such. I don't think I called them circles. And maybe I did, because it was in my mind, because Joshua had been talking about the holacracy thing right from the beginning. Joshua and Chris, and that was something that I was in agreement with. Was that we needed to have offices, basically. So yeah, you could say that I was thinking about that. And my campaign or platform or whatever the hell you want to call it was Eden Pride. Eden needs to take responsibility for its own matters. Eden has been abandoned, and Eden needs to take control of its own destiny. So yes, I can say that I campaigned on that.
Well, it sounded like what you described is that in your mind you had that, but did you really outwardly campaign? I mean, can I go back and review videos where you were talking about that, or Telegram messages?
You can watch my election video from this term.
Yeah, Perry, all of the videos from the Eden election are available on IPFS on the Eden interface. And then also, I listened to what Chuck was speaking and then interacted with it quite a bit. I was writing a bit at the time. And Chuck had, I don't know if Chuck recalled everything there. I mean, there's a lot that he left out, I think. But he also was, I think, running with Eden election, like the idea of expanding Eden elections as well, and hoping to build the software to enable other communities to empower themselves with Eden software and the Eden process as well, which also brings to another subject that I just shared in the chat that I think is interesting and very related to this. I mentioned James Mart a few times on this call because I think that he has some really insightful thoughts that we can learn from here, and he made an excellent article about persistent roles in fractal governance, which is kind of related to your question before, Perry, about how smart contracts could be embedded in circles. And I would very much recommend reading this article from James. He basically talks about how like Holacracy can work with Eden with additional DAOs that are independent and not centralizing. Each DAO is independent, but Eden can empower these DAOs. These DAOs can use the Fractally process, like the Eden fractal, or they can use different processes as well if it's better. And I feel like that is a really helpful solution, that we can make circles work while increasing independence and decentralization, and increasing the efficacy of Eden to be able to work towards and increase the independence and power of its community members. And then I'd also like to say too, we've been going on for almost 2 hours now, so I'd like to just throw out the idea that maybe we should start wrapping up soon, and I'm interested to hear what people think about those ideas, if you'd like to, or if people would like to I'll wrap it up soon, or speak about anything first.
Well, I just want to finish my point, which was I didn't get the impression that the centralization of Eden, which that's how I interpret the circles, was something that was widely discussed before the CDs were elected. Now, it's okay. It's people, during your term, the CDs, of course, should feel free to bring new ideas. But I didn't get the impression, at least monitoring Telegram, that that's what was going on. So the idea of increasing the rate before that has actually been a consensus of the community, is probably putting the cart before the horse.
In the term,
I just want to finish. I'm not opposed to the idea of changing the rate. I think that's reasonable. That there are legitimate reasons to change that rate, and so that flexibility should exist. But I do believe that before we go down that road, it's much more important to determine how we're going to be spending our money, and a higher order question of that, of what are our rules of the game. So thank you very much, Chuck, for that.
Yeah, sorry. Nobody campaigns on things necessarily, but they still need to happen, right? A lot of people don't campaign on things, and then they find themselves elected, and it's like, oh, wow, there's a whole lot of things that I wasn't thinking about that actually need to happen. Nobody was considering that EOS would get cut in third, the value of EOS over this term, right? Nobody was, maybe some people were thinking about that, but it wasn't at the forefront of my mind that we would see 82-cent EOS or whatever the hell it ended up. And that's a pretty big consideration when you talk about purchasing power and expecting people to be, allocating resources. It was something that Edgar brought up. It's like, delegates and chief delegates, when you're dealing with a lot of resources, you kind of have to hedge this stuff a little bit. If you're going to be issuing payments in US dollars and you've got this fluctuating currency, you need to figure out how you're going to hedge this to manage your resources. And then that brought up the subject, maybe we should be managing this centrally. Maybe the whole treasury should be hedged somehow, right? That's a concept to think about. It's something that we've learned of from this term. But on top of that, like you're talking about centralization in Eden, and Eden was fully centralized when it was being developed by the Fractally team. And then it was brought down to zero. There was no ization at all, central or decentral. There was no ization. And then now we have to take responsibility for Eden's code, its communications, its operations, and we need to at least make the offices that are going to see those tasks done. That's all there is to it. We either do that or we keep asking somebody else to manage our stuff for us. And that's what we were dealt with this time round. And whether we campaigned on those concepts or not is irrelevant, because that's what we were presented with. So now we've got other things to deal with, and we're leaving some very gentle suggestions in the hands of the next chief delegates and inviting them to think about opening the possibilities for Eden up, and we didn't say anything else than that in the bylaws. Essentially, just it's like here, think about opening it up. I'm done. Thank you.
I appreciate you showing up and giving color to a lot of those decisions. It helps understand. It helps me understand what your thinking is. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, and I'd like to really add too, Chuck. It's very much appreciated that you're here. That speaks a lot, I think, as a chief delegate of being a member of the community. That's something I'd like to see a little bit more of with chief delegates as well too. I get it though, super busy. This show's just getting started, but ideally we would like to see more engagement because, it's awesome to be able to talk about these things, and then you can take your input and feedback from discussions here and carry that on through your voice at the chief delegate meetings. I guess I have a question I'd like to pose to you, but first some points on the 5% increase, with the price of EOS getting cut in a third. That makes sense as to why we would want potentially, but at the same time I also think, why not the thing is, I start to think deeper now. I'm like deeper about when we mess with the amount of the treasury drawdown, it is almost like centralization and of we're taking capital that was intended to be deployed dependent on the life cycle of the drawdown several months from now, which would be into another chief delegate's term. So it's like you're almost spending their money to a certain extent if you look at it from that angle. So I guess my question that I kind of want to pose is like, what are your thoughts though? And before that though too, I do what I like too of like what the chief delegates have done and have voiced is like, hey, we're just proposing stuff. We don't have to accept it. So like, this is just our viewpoint where we're learning. Obviously, the more polished and like refined your point is of what you propose as being like your reflection of like what you really strongly wanted to push for, I think is important. But at the same time, putting out the ideas is super important because that's what creates conversation. But I guess, so my question though is, how do you see from that point of view of if we start tweaking and messing with how much we can affect the drawdown percentage of the Eden Treasury, how does that not become a potential like hazard for all of Eden? Because if we set that precedent that the Treasury percentage can be changed, that's a point where at any point in the future of Eden is an attack vector to completely dismantle all of Eden, in my opinion, because like I said, then it can go down that slippery slope of, okay, well, let's propose that the next set of chief delegates are, they'll have a higher percentage of a drawdown now that new chief delegates get elected in, and now they're almost like, well, why wouldn't we? We're going to be received a lot better when we have more money that we can deploy into the community that's electing us. Like it just, to me, definitely, I see the corruption route that can take place. And so now we're putting a lot of dependency on the good faith of all the community members. But if we're thinking of the long term, I don't think this is a good precedent to set. And rather, I think maybe we advocate for increasing our treasury through other means. It doesn't even have to be through the ENF. One thing I would like to propose, is we got Brock Pierce as a chief delegate, and he's got the Helios fund that he got from Block 1, and an argument can be made too that a lot of those funds would be nice to see kind of deployed back. So it would be nice to see maybe that be a potential way of increasing the fund of Eden. And now we're not dependent fully on the ENF. Now we have another basically entity that has donated and helped fund the Eden, and it comes through none other than a chief delegate himself who has a position where he could do so. That's just kind of a proposal, but that's how I would like to see things is, yes, our purchasing power has been cut in third. That's part of the blockchain game. And at the end of the day, you could start to put that on the network to even give it more reason of like, well, hey, you know, the network knows like the price of the has depreciated. You know, why not just kind of help us out here? Like we are creating, don't you know? I don't know. I just think the 5% is core to like I'm not a big fan of changing that. And yeah, sorry, I posed a question and then I kind of rambled on. So yeah, I'll go back to the question and then pass it on to you, Chuck. But like, what are your overall thoughts of, you know, kind of the danger that we kind of enter by setting a precedent of like, hey, the Eden Treasury percentage can be changed dependent on, you know, the proposal of the chief delegates.
Felix, before Chuck answers that, maybe I'm curious what your thoughts are about the chief delegates having the active key, because as far as I understand, we're already trusting the chief delegates every term, whereby currently 2 of 5 chief delegates, I believe, could agree to just do whatever they want with the entire treasury if they want, regardless of the disbursement schedule. So I feel like the risk is there already independently of the disbursement rate being increased.
That was my question.
It's actually, I mean, per the bylaws, it's 4 of 5, but right now, per the permissions, it's 2 of 5, and we will be changing that permission immediately to 4 of 5. But that's the question, isn't it? The previous chief delegates gave the ability to handle the contract again because they had been abandoned. There was no developer any longer. It was either, do we fold this thing up and give the money back to the ENF, or do we pursue this and try to chart our own course? The previous chief delegates, about 1 month left in their term, they said, fuck it, let's just go and do this. And they decided to boldly chart this course where bang, 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 we have to do these things to set, basically to set the conditions in order so that Eden can take care of itself. And part of that was that the elected officials needed to be in control of the contract and essentially the treasury. So yes, the chief delegates, following the letter of the law right now, could decide tomorrow to change the treasury disbursements to 15%. And there's nothing to stop us from doing that. There's no bylaw to stop that. There's no nothing. What we're doing with this is putting a variable into the bylaws, first of all, which is very important. We need to have that variable in the bylaws because I don't think the 5% needs to be some sort of religious tenet for organization. I think the 5% is just, as I said, right from Dan's mouth, it was there in the event that we never had any more funding again. Okay, so we've got the 5% and it's a variable. And what we're doing is we're bringing it onto that document to say, yes, this is a variable that we can address. And right now we're recommending that it goes to this. And 15, I can tell you, I mean, like if EOS is $5 in 2 months, that's going to be a lot of money. And if that's the case, we're going to have delegates tripping over themselves to find out how they can change those bylaws, how they can or set up conditions or set up buckets where they can logically, transparently and responsibly spend that money. And you could even say that by putting it up to 15 right now, we're almost creating that crisis. You know, sorry, that phrasing hasn't been on our mind, but I'm just saying that right now, that it's like it's giving the opportunity, sure, it's giving the opportunity for moral hazard, and we understand that, but it's also giving the opportunity that the next term of elected officials are going to be able to figure out what needs to happen with that number, whether you want to reduce that number. Now it's a variable in the bylaws, and it's been passed, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't want to, like, if they want to reduce that number right away, people are going to, my whole point is that there's a democratic process to deal with these issues. If you think, if enough delegates think there's something wrong, 2/3 plus 1 of the delegates can call a snap election. If you think that there's a reason to campaign against this, you get a groundswell of support and you get a bunch of people who are on the same page that this drawdown is going to kill Eden. Let's change it back down. And then they're elected, and then they have to stand by their election promises and decrease the number. It's just a variable. And if we even have it on the books for 3 months or really 2 months, because there'll be a month of ratification, the variable's on the books and people can talk about its effect on the community. And I don't think it's a crisis. The crisis would be if you elected representatives who were captured in some sort of way or who were part of a party and they started putting money around in directions that was against the goals and objects of Eden to enrich themselves, then you've got a problem. But right away, as has been said from the beginning, this is a long game and it's a reputation game, and those people can be replaced through the election system. And you just have to start banging the drums and writing the stories and showing the videos of people lying and people stealing, and they will get replaced. The smart contract is there, it's going to keep running, and people will get replaced using the election system. If something's wrong with the system, it'll get fixed through the system itself.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Chuck. That's a very insightful way to think about things, and yeah, it gets me kind of, wanting to think about it more as well. But no, I guess what Dan and Perry kind of posed to my question too is, I don't know, I feel like, Chuck kind of answered it for me too, as far as like through his explanation is, I guess, it is reputational. Like this is a reputation systems that we're building through Eden, Pomelo, everything that we're doing by basically posting some form of online identity that we go through these processes of getting funding, and posting it online and on the blockchain forever. It's something now it's something I really am wanting to dive more into and thinking about. Especially now that we are approaching the election, and it's going to be super interesting to see. We're not supposed, I get we want to avoid from forming parties, and I definitely advocate we don't want to have any parties, but we are going to have stances within the community. And so it's just interesting because as we get deeper into really developing these things out, the debate is going to be there. I feel like the elections are going to be they're just going to start to get a little bit more clear of certain topics that are important that we're voting on. And now the idea of okay, we're no longer voting on who's got the best project idea proposal. We are truly voting on leaders to represent our voice. And that's how I feel like, at least from my point of view, I viewed Eden as being that. It's a replacement of our entire democratic system of electing leaders, and Eden will be the core of all that.
I want to make a distinction between a DAO that controls the inflation of an ecosystem, or that is closest to the source of the inflation, and a DAO, one of many DAOs that may exist in an ecosystem. I think, Chuck, what you guys are stepping towards is perfectly fine for one of many DAOs. Why not? Why not? If you can garner the support of enough people that want that kind of DAO that operates with those kinds of circles and is willing to accept that level of centralization, no problem. However, I think that's very different from a DAO that is controlling the inflation. I believe that one needs to be as simple as possible and subject to the least amount of volatility, and as much as possible have everything that is under its control in code, and the account should be owned by, excuse me one moment, the account should be owned by the block producers. And with those block producers should have the MSIGs for that, not any other entity. So it should be ultimately controlled by the block producers, or preferably Eden, the governance, actually controls the block producers. So it needs to be, the highest order DAO needs to be far simpler, far less susceptible and vulnerable to volatility in its bylaws and code and everything else. And it's the one that can decide in that very simple form how to allocate funds to various DAOs, one of which could be the instantiation of Eden on EOS. One could be Fractally, one could be Helios. But the highest order DAO should be extremely simple and insulated from volatility. Thank you.
All right. Well,
Thanks,
super.
Barry. Yep, super. Exactly.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say super fascinating discussions as always. But yeah, I don't know. I think Dan, or you wanted to wrap us up, or you had some comments?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. I mean, if others want to continue, then I'm happy to keep recording. I do have to get going in the next few minutes, and we have been talking for over 2 hours. I can imagine people might be getting tired or having things to do, but I feel free to keep discussing if you'd like.
I would like to share a quick perspective, if that's all right.
Yep. Go ahead, Andrew.
So I have my primary interest in Eden is allowing it to achieve sustainability in terms of within the system, and that's something that bringing the distribution to 15% of the pool up gives me concerns about, especially, we may have some sort of assurances from the ENF that we have funding for maybe a certain quantity of time or something like that. And I think it's great to do experimentation, but if we are experimenting in a way that jeopardizes the sustainability of the system, I think that we should err on the side of not being quite as aggressive in that regard. So, for example, we've got 3-month election cycles, and we've got 200,000 EOS in the treasury. After 3 months, 200,000 EOS is now 122,000 EOS. It's 4 or 5 months before you've cut your amount of funding in half. And so if we've got a system that within the cycle of less than 2 elections draws down the our treasury to less than half of what it was, like within 1 year we're at 15% of our original treasury. And so that's one concern that I have with increasing that amount. That said, I agree with the goal of it. So the goal being to experiment and try and like create Eden as a platform for governance that someone can use for their own DAO. I think that's a very powerful idea, and it's something that we can use, and something that, in terms of, we were just talking about selecting leaders, it's something that Fractally doesn't quite specifically address. So it seems like something Eden is very perfectly positioned for. But I do just want to express my concern around jeopardizing the sustainability of Eden in that experimentation process.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I still do feel concerns around it as well too. Even though Eden, I mean Chuck has, he made really great points, but also if we're looking from a point of view of where we're at within EOS, like, I mean, do we want to go through these funds like with a higher percentage of a drawdown early on when we potentially could be very close to seeing EOS break out in price with the anticipation of a lot of big potential price drivers coming up here in August, September with the EVM, the new branding launch, the token 2049. So yeah, I agree. You know, this treasury needs to be protected because it is also something that helps make Eden more independent. Because you know, if the price goes well and you know, it sets Eden up in a very strong position, especially if it does, like if the EOS price appreciates quite a bit. It sets us up nicely, and we don't necessarily have to be, you know, dependent. And so, yeah, no, I agree. I think the 15, you know, and also kind of this brings us full circle of like from the beginning of the meeting, we were talking about Fibonacci numbers, and 15 is not a Fibonacci number, but 5 is. So I don't know, all great points, but yeah, it is. We've been going on for about 2 hours, and so yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone again for showing up. Ideally, I would, you know, we're recording these, but I am starting to really want to, you know, definitely like reward everyone who's participating here in some form. So, you know, Chuck, I know I mentioned with you about like trying to learn how to generate NFTs, because I think it'd be cool to give out NFTs for everyone who's showing up here, because I definitely, Dan and I appreciate it very much. Your guys' support is very much appreciated, and yeah, so I'm gonna open it up to any closing remarks.
Yeah, Felix, that's what the Eden NFT Circle is going to be doing, brother. We're going to be, you know, building the ability for any Eden member to give out an Eden endorsed NFT, an Eden published NFT for anything that they want. So if if say you and Dan as leaders of this circle, for example, have the permission from Eden to publish, then you can distribute, you know, Eden NFTs using our tool, the Eden tool. That's sort of what we're envisioning, and it's just an example of a little plugin for our community that will add value and excitement to our community, and it'll be open source. Anybody else can use it, but it'll encourage people to want to be part of these things. So anytime somebody comes out, you know, for example, like, not that we want to encourage people talking, but if you know, you get an NFT for every minute that you talk, that kind of thing. Not an NFT, but you know, respect points or something like that, right? But there's any number of things we can do to reward people for these things, and really, our imaginations are the only limit. Because once we get circles built where we've got developers starting to interact with people, like non-developers, people with ideas, they can start developing these things into something that's tangible, and we can start playing with them. And again, all the excitement from Fractally, all the excitement around Eden in general, it had to do with meeting together and having quick discussions and short meetings, and then looking for results from those meetings. And I love what you guys are doing with the town halls, with the Wednesday meetings, and as I said, we just need to run our process over and over and over again in as many different permutations as we can think of, because everything that we do is developing more data for all of us, and we're all working together on this, and I think we've got great things coming. But again, I invite everybody to talk about those bylaw changes, bylaw proposals. Talk about the implications of a bigger budget drawdown. Talk about the implications of having circles, official circles. Yeah, thanks so much for everything you guys have been doing.
Thank you so much, Chuck, and very well said. I completely agree, and I'm very excited about all those things you said. Yep. So thank you, Chuck, very much, and thank you everybody for joining so much. And we can even have like retroactive NFTs for people who have been here, because we know everybody's here, so maybe that's something we can consider in the future. And yeah, just once again, what we're doing, I think everybody knows what we're doing these every Sunday at 16 UTC. And then there's also the Eden Fractal at every Wednesday at 13 UTC. And everyone's welcome, very welcome to attend both of these events. Felix, do you have any last words, or does anybody else have any last words?
No.
Just wanted to. Sorry.
Yep, go ahead, Andrew.
I just want to thank Chuck for his leadership and Eden. And I appreciate what he's doing, trying to think creatively about bringing Eden forward.
Yep, for sure. Yep, Chuck. Again, you're very much appreciated, man. It's awesome to have you attend these. So, yep. But yeah, all right, guys. Well, again, another great week of fascinating discussion, and yeah, feel free to stick around here in the Eden Town Hall and chat amongst yourselves if you want, or engage in these chat rooms, and we'll see you guys throughout the week, either on Discord or on Wednesday in the next Eden Fractal, or at the very least next week, that'll be the last one right before the election. So I anticipate that show being a juicy one. So until then, guys, I appreciate everyone, and take care. Have a great weekend.
Go Eden.
Go
Thanks,
Eden.
guys.
Go
Appreciate it.
Eden Unios.